Becoming a millionaire is an amazing feat. Making money in billions, however, is a different ballgame entirely. And while there are few people who managed to break the mark in recent years, there are some who did it even before it was cool. Step aside, Jeff Bezos. From 19th century industrialists to the African king who owned almost all of the world's gold, here are the 10 richest people who have ever lived. Number 10. Cornelius Vanderbilt, 185 billion. When you're talking about the richest men in history, Cornelius Vanderbilt is one man that made it to the list. At his prime, Cornelius Vanderbilt's wealth reached a whopping 185 billion. Born in 1794 to a struggling family in Staten Island, Vanderbilt's story is a story of rags to riches. He struggled through most of his early years, but ended up building a colossal fortune in the railroad and shipping industries. He got his break sailing barges across New York Harbor and gradually expanded into steamships and railroads. Ruthless. As a businessman, one of his favorite business tactics was to undercut the competition so heavily that they would pay him to stay out of a given market. He was known for being quite a philanthropist too. He donated to many charities, founded Vanderbilt University, and gave away most of his wealth later on in life, which is probably why his family still carries so much clout today. CNN anchor Anderson Cooper is part of the Vanderbilt family. Number 9. Henry Ford, 199 billion. One of the most influential figures in American business history, Henry Ford, was able to amass a fortune just under 200 billion in his lifetime. Henry Ford was an enigma. He was a lot of things: a transportation revolutionary and a trailblazer in industry and business. He was one of the first to implement higher wages. But what Mr. Ford was most known for is founding the giant automobile company, Ford Motor Company, and bringing automobiles to the masses. He also came up with the assembly line concept, which made it easier to manufacture, making cars affordable to the masses. His ideas paid off too. He sold over 1 million vehicles in 1920 alone and continued to dominate the automobile market throughout his lifetime. It's not surprising that when he died in 1947, Ford was worth the equivalent of $200 billion and some change in today's money. Before we move on, leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be the first watching new episodes. Number 8. Muammar Gaddafi, 200 billion. One of the most popular people on this list of richest people is none other than everyone's favorite dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, the recently deceased and overthrown ruler of the North African country of Libya. A highly controversial politician and ruler, Gaddafi was famously overthrown in 2011 during the Libyan civil war. He was dragged into the streets and killed by revolutionaries. After his death, the assets of the former leader and his family were frozen, and the figures that came out were frightening, to put it mildly. The U.S. seized $30 billion of the family's investments. Canada had $2.4 billion locked up, Australia $1.7 billion, and the UK kept them away from $1 billion. But even then, it was reported that these figures were nowhere close to his actual wealth. Libyan officials estimated that deposed leader Colonel Gaddafi, during his 42-year rule over Libya, squirreled away over $200 billion in secret bank accounts, shady investments, and dubious real estate deals during his dictatorship, stolen from the country's massive oil revenues. Number 7. William the Conqueror, 229 billion. No one can place a finger on William the Conqueror's actual wealth, but it's said to be between 209 billion and 229 billion. Best known for becoming the first Norman king of England, William reigned from 1066 until 1087. He led the first successful invasion of England, becoming a monarch after deposing the previous ruler. Before he became William the Conqueror, he used to go by a different name, William the Bastard. He earned the name because the locals believed he was a descendant of Viking invaders from years before, which would explain where he got his knack for invasion. After William invaded the kingdom in 1066, he seized lands and plundered treasures from Sussex to Yorkshire, worth about 228 billion today. He spent the better part of his riches on everything from tapestries to castles, including the iconic White Tower at the Tower of London. Number 6. John D. Rockefeller, 341 billion. The Rockefeller name is one of the most popular names in the world. The name has come to be recognized and associated with power, wealth, and luxury, thanks to music and pop culture. It's safe to say that the name Rockefeller is deeply ingrained in American history. For good reason. John D. Rockefeller's $340 billion fortune still stands today as nearly the largest the modern world has ever seen. Born in 1839 in New York, John D. Rockefeller began investing in the petroleum industry in 1863, and by 1880, his Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of American oil production. Apart from being a revolutionary of the energy and petroleum industries, Rockefeller is also well known for his philanthropy, founding 2 colleges during his lifetime, the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University. He died in 1937, but the Rockefeller Center still stands today as a reminder of how big he was. Number 5. Andrew Carnegie, $372 billion. Rockefeller gets all the press, but this next man may well be the richest American of all time. Andrew Carnegie is an incredibly wealthy and powerful industrialist that came to prominence during the mid-1800s by conquering the steel industry. Born in Scotland, Carnegie came from a very low-income family that entered the U.S. in the late 1840s. He successfully invested in several ventures before founding the U.S. Steel Corp, earning himself a $310 billion fortune. Eventually, the Scottish immigrants sold his company, U.S. Steel, to J.P. Morgan in 1901, but not less than $480 million, a sum that's close to $372 billion in 2020. He published The Gospel of Wealth, where he outlined why he would be donating the bulk of his wealth, an estimated $372 billion, to philanthropy. As he famously wrote, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." Money, as Carnegie believed, was to be used to service society, and that he did. He is known for giving away most of his wealth and is fondly remembered as one of the world's foremost philanthropists. Number 4. Akbar I. When he was alive, this man controlled an empire that accounted for about 1/4 of global economic output. The greatest leader of India's Mughal dynasty, Akbar I, was the emperor who lived in luxury that rivaled the Bourbons of France and the Romanovs of Russia. The Mughals were rich conquerors, so it's only right that their emperor enjoys the finest things in life. The British were so impressed by the wealth of the Mughals that the word Mughal entered the English language as a term to describe an all-powerful ruler of industry, films, and other endeavors. Renowned for his lavish lifestyle, this emperor conquered hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory and ruled over much of the Indian subcontinent, known as the Mughal Empire, from 1556 until 1605. He controlled around 25% of the world's GDP at the time, which would translate to a staggering $2 trillion. No wonder he got the title Akbar the Great. Number 3. Augustus Caesar, $4.6 trillion. At the turn of the 1st century, Egypt was the powerhouse of the world. The richest country of its age, Egypt, made up at least 30% of global GDP and harbored most of the world's richest people. At the top of this hierarchy was a man that practically owned all of Egypt, Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar wasn't just in charge of an empire that accounted for 30% of the world's economic output. The adopted son of Julius Caesar controlled much of the world's most powerful states, including Egypt. The Roman Empire was at its most powerful under Augustus and enjoyed unprecedented success. According to researchers at Stanford, Augustus at one point held personal wealth equivalent to 1/5 of his empire's economy. All that equates to a wealth dangerously close to $4.6 trillion. That's hard to top. Number 2. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan has come to be known in modern times as one of the most successful military leaders. As the leader of the Mongol Empire, which at its height stretched from China to Europe, he controlled the largest empire in history. However, even though he was probably the most powerful ruler of pre-modern terms, Genghis Khan lived quite a peculiar lifestyle. According to experts, even when he conquered almost half of the world, Genghis never hoarded his wealth. On the contrary, Khan's generosity is likely why he was so influential. His habit of sharing the spoils with his soldiers and other commanders contributed to his success. Unlike many pre-modern armies, his soldiers weren't allowed to keep personal loot for themselves. After an area was conquered, every item was taken, inventoried by official clerks, and then distributed amongst the military and their families. Although Genghis received a fair share of the spoils, that hardly made him rich. He built no palace for himself or his family, no temple, no tomb. He didn't even have a house of his own. In the end, he died and was buried like a common man. Number 1. Mansa Musa. Coming in at number 1, Mansa Musa of Mali is the richest person who ever lived. Sure, the king of Timbuktu and paramount ruler of Mali may not be the most popular, but his stories of his huge wealth made it across generations. Born in 1280, Mansa Musa got most of his wealth from the production and trade of salt and gold, more than half of the world's supply at the time. Musa's African kingdom was likely the largest producer of gold in the world, at a time which gold was especially in high demand. But how rich was the king himself? Well, that's the thing. You see, there's no way to put an accurate number on his wealth. Records are scarce, and when there were, Musa's riches were so immense that people struggled to describe them. Some tales of some of his doings did make it, though. It is said that during his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, Musa's spending was so lavish that it caused a currency crisis in Egypt. He gave away so much gold that it crashed the Egyptian economy and caused extreme inflation and lasted for years after he left. Some say his party consisted of dozens of camels, each carrying hundreds of pounds of gold, and an army of 200,000 men, including 40,000 archers, slaves, and servants, all of whom would have been fed and catered for with millions. So, in essence, it's hard to say exactly how rich Mansa Musa was, but when no one can even comprehend your wealth, that's saying a lot about how darn rich you are. Dying in 1337, Musa left his huge amount of money to his heirs, who not only squandered the best part, but failed to protect the family worth just 2 generations down the line, when the empire was overturned in a civil war and conquered by invading foreign nations. Thanks for watching. Leave the comment down below and let us know what do you think. Don't forget to subscribe for new and upcoming episodes.